Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Mariana Dalto, and our guest today is Mickie Kennedy. He's the founder of eReleases, a press release distribution service that was launched 27 years ago to empower small businesses, authors, and startups with affordable media access and incredible visibility. Mikey's journey began when he realized that most PR firms charge very high fees, and that motivated him to create eReleases with a mission of delivering personal service, exceptional value, and a genuine newswire reach for clients of all sizes. Mickie has fundamentally changed press releases distribution, leveraging empathy, innovation, and expertise to champion the success of small businesses and thought leaders. Welcome, Mickie, to the show.
No, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk about this topic. It's very relevant in today's days with trying to be relevant with so much noise with media and everything. So thank you for joining us today. Okay, so before you started e-releases. Tell us a little bit about your background and what made you realize that there was a gap in the market for this kind of affordable press releases services for small business owners.
I think, I had graduated from a master's program and I was looking for something to do. And I realized that, um, you know, uh, I needed an office job. I was waiting tables. And so I got hired at a telecom research startup as employee number three because I had writing in my background. They wanted me to write press releases and send them out. And we were using fax at the time. So this was a while ago, like almost 30 years ago. And so I would spend a whole day programming a fax machine with 100 numbers, deleting those the following day and putting additional like 50 numbers in, and it did nothing. And the owner of the company, who was a telecom attorney, said, "Yeah, they don't do much, but I feel like we have to do it." And so we sent it out, and not much happened. I took that as my mission to figure out what we're doing wrong because I was wasting a day and a half faxing. And so I realized that we were just publishing data. We were just, here's Caribbean telecom traffic data to and from the US. And I looked at articles and realized that journalists really like a story and they generally follow a story arc, even if it's a small article. And so I took that and redrafted the most recent press release, which was about Caribbean telecom traffic to and from the US. And I noticed that like one country had way more traffic than all the others. And it wasn't a country that I think anybody would have heard of. I can't even recall what it was at the time, but it wasn't a major country. And so as I explored it and looked into it, I discovered that that was the call center for 1-900 numbers. And those were really popular 30 years ago. You could call a horoscope and get a pre-recorded, horoscope that was updated daily. Press 5 if you're a Taurus, or, press 2 if you're a Virgo. And it might cost 50, 75 cents a minute. And it would be billed to your landline phone because, again, this was pre-cell phones. And there was also other types of things. You could talk to a pet expert live for like $2 or $3 a minute. And so I redrafted the release talking about the growth of 1-900 numbers and the how that's boomed the telecom traffic for this country that's acting as an intermediary for 1-900 numbers, almost like a call center for them. All numbers rerouted through that country. And that got picked up by the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, Financial Times, Red Herring, and a couple, I think three telecom trade publications. And so that was very different for us. And so I felt like, you know, I I had figured it out. Journalists want a story and they want something that they can turn into a story arc. And so from that point forward, all of our press releases I wrote to satisfy the needs, the facts, the data, the story that the journalists would find compelling. And we got considerable pickup from that day forward. And around that same time, journalists started calling after we faxed and said, "Hey, could you start emailing these press releases to us instead of faxing?" And that was also a light bulb moment for me that it's a lot easier to email a press release than it is to fax. And so I started building a Rolodex of emails from journalists, and about a year later launched eReleases as an email only service. And that was it. I was a matchmaker sending press releases to journalists according to my clients' industries and subjects and things like that. And that evolved over time as well, because what happened is the explosion of media databases. And so everybody could have access to a media database, and everybody's emailing journalists, and they're paying a licensing fee for 10,000, 20,000 a year for access to his media databases. And they talk themselves into sending the releases off target. And so the result is that today journalists talk about their inbox being a minefield, and they don't really know how to easily navigate it. They're not checking stuff actively. They're filtering emails that they know who they are and where they're coming from, but a lot of it's just off-targeted press releases. And so a few years ago, PR Newswire reached out to us and liked what we were doing and said, "We'd like to partner with you," which was perfect timing because I needed a better way to get my clients to journalists. And so every release that goes out today goes out nationally through PR Newswire. It also goes to the appropriate industry categories. And PR Newswire charges like $1,700 plus for a 600-word press release, and through us, it's a fraction of that price, probably like 2/3 to 75% less than going directly to the wire. The caveat being, we work with small businesses, entrepreneurs, startups, authors, basically people who don't have $30,000 to $50,000 a year budgets that their salespeople would want to work directly with. And so it's been a good partnership, because this is the type of customer that they wouldn't be out there seeking. And aggregately, we represent 10,000 press releases a year for these small businesses, and so it's considerable business when you combine them all together.
So you're saying, so if I hear this right, okay, now like there's so much data available and people have those contacts to these press releases, like the journalists will prefer to connect with you or anyone who has like doing these businesses for other people more so than getting like individuals reaching out to them specifically for an article. Like you have a better chance of working with someone who has a business helping with writing press releases. You know what I'm
So
saying? Yeah.
So, yeah, email is a terrible way to reach national journalists today. Their inbox is, maybe 15 to 2,000 emails a day. Bankers and financial analysts, people who cover the banking industry and report on that, are getting emails from golf club companies who say, "Oh, bankers love to play golf, but these people would never write an article about golf clubs." And so that's happening in every industry, because these media databases are available to everybody, and there's no caps put on it.
Right.
The golf industry, the golf club company that gets a $10,000 database to a media database that has 200,000 journalists in it. They send to the 1,400 journalists who cover golf, but then they talk themselves into saying, "Well, what would it hurt if we also sent to the 4,000, 5,000 financial analysts and banking reporters and stuff like that?" And so email is a very ineffective way to reach people today,
So
especially
what's the best way to
journalists,
reach to them then?
through the newswire. So when a journalist logs into, in the US, it's a duopoly, PR Newswire and Business Wire. Um, Almost everybody goes through either of them, though some people have a reason for going through Globe Newswire. If you're publicly traded, you don't want a lot of journalists really looking over your numbers very carefully. Uh, Globe Newswire is cheaper and satisfies SEC disclosures, but it's less effective at getting media pickup. So if you're looking for media pickup, get earned media. It's Business Wire and PR Newswire are the two players. And so a journalist logs in there, and if they cover, let's say, fashion, they will see a fashion feed. They can customize that feed. So every time they log in, it's very relevant for them. Maybe they don't cover retail fashion, so you can exclude, things like ready to wear, keywords like that. You can exclude certain brands and companies, and so the feed that you see is very pure. And this is
Got it.
exactly the press releases that you're interested in. Where if they went to their email inbox, 90% may not be relevant to them, the emails that are there. And so that's made it much more important for going over a wire like PR Newswire and Business Wire. Some people may have also heard of other wires like Associated Press, Reuters, places like that. They don't issue press releases on behalf of
Mm.
people. Everything they issue, they've written. They accept press releases. They actually go to Business Wire. They actually go to PR Newswire, and they'll look at a press release, but they'll write an article. And the way that they work is they finish an article and then they license it. So if the Baltimore Sun's really busy one day and the Supreme Court has a decision, they know that they can just pull that story off the Associated Press. They pay a licensing fee to the Associated Press, and the article will usually say AP at the beginning in the newspaper and on the website, and they don't have to take their time and resources and drop everything and write an article about that Supreme Court decision. But when it comes to the newswires of press releases, it really is largely PR Newswire and Business Wire. And going through eReleases is a way to save, 2/3 of the money than going directly to either of those wires directly.
Okay, so this is a really nice journey for small business owners to understand the process because you're like again overwhelmed with so many ways to get the visibility out there, and the best strategy now is like go into these news wires or business wire, and then but they have a cost and that cost is high, so then going through you they get a better chance to first help to write the wire, that we will talk about that, have the best way to write the press release, but also the fact that you offer better pricing than going straight to them in order to publish. That's one piece, right? Now
Yes.
let's go back a little bit to help people understand what's the difference between, and this is a basic question, but I want people to understand what's the difference between a press release versus an article,
Right.
because it's not the same. So could you please explain the difference?
Sure. So a press release is usually written in the third person. It's an announcement. You might have a quote where you say something in the first person, usually a company executive or maybe the person issuing the release if they're an author or something like that. An article is generally written objectively, and it's if you open a magazine or a trade publication, those are articles. You generally don't see a press release where it's got the city and state and company X is releasing the news. It's generally written a little bit differently. And the way it usually works is companies release the press releases and journalists transform them into articles. Sometimes it can be effective if the news is pretty soft to write an article yourself, and we call those sort of features. And those are probably effective with smaller newspapers. They're just looking for free content. They don't work really well for trade publications or big newspapers or things like that. But most of the time, you're writing a press release as a company or an individual, and you're releasing it to the media, and the media does the job of turning that into an article.
Okay. So for those business owners who are attempting to write their own press releases, what are the biggest mistakes you see them making when they create those?
So I think the biggest mistake is not including the elements for a story. The most popular press release that we get is the product or service launch. Hey, we have a new product or a new service or an updated product, like version 3.0, and it's got AI and it's got all these great bells and whistles. And it usually is just here's the product, here's a list of features, and then here's a page to learn more or buy it. And again, journalists they like to follow a story arc, and there's not a lot of story there. And so one of the things that I tell my clients is go back and put a use case study in there. You know, these products are usually tested and tried out by people before they're launched. And so take a favorable experience someone had. If you have a logistics software solution, take a company that used it. Say, hey, here's a company that's 3 years old. They've lost money every year, And using this to write new invoices, they now are projected to have a profit by the end of this year. And, that's a transformative moment. You can actually even go out and research a publicly available data point like, hey, 62% of new transportation companies fell in the first 5 years because they don't achieve profitability. And here we solved that for a company that looked like it was going to be a casualty. And in year three, they're finally projected to have a profit. Then have a quote by that person. We always thought we just needed to write more invoices. We didn't understand that we had to write smarter invoices, and this software allowed us to write invoices that would be profitable. And we knew at a certain point it wasn't worth negotiating anymore because we weren't going to make any money on that transaction. And so that's a way to sort of put the story in there. All of a sudden, a journalist knows that their job is to figure out what is going to entertain or educate my clients, which are the readers. And here's a product with features. There's not a lot that's going to entertain or educate them, but all of a sudden, here's a story that says, "Hey, here's an example of what this solves," and here was a transformative moment that this solution solved for this company, and that really shows the stakes. It talks about, the fact that so many companies fail. All of a sudden, the stakes are there, and they know that that's going to be much more likely to be of interest to their audience. So, so many people write their press release in a greedy way. They're thinking about just themselves. Hey, we want to sell more products, or we want to get more people to go to our website and look at this particular thing. And what you have to realize is it's a balancing act. How can you accomplish that, but also provide enough data and information and story that you can bring a journalist along and get them invested and say, yes, my audience would really like to know about this. And so you have to reverse engineer a little bit and go back to what you're announcing and put some of those elements in there. And some of it is intrigue and story in the case of a use case study. Sometimes it's pointing out some of the things that maybe people in your industry aren't talking about. I call those blind spots. Those work very effectively when you bring something to the attention that maybe your industry isn't covering very well yet. Think about the type of things that you can't wait to go to a conference because you can say, "Hey, I've been noticing this trend. Are you seeing it as well?" If that's the type of thing that's coming up, that could be really great material to put into a press release because it shows that you've identified a pattern that the industry hasn't caught up and recognized yet. And when you do that, the industry loves to get behind those types of things. So, being a little more strategic and proactive in what you're announcing can really give you an advantage. The truth is that 97% of press releases that go out the correct way, go out over PR Newswire, go out over Business Wire, don't get any earned media, which we call it when someone turns them into articles. And so 3% success rate is not good.
That's
And
very low.
it is. And it shows how difficult it is to get pick up. But if you operate in just doing the types of press releases that make up the 3%, you can
Mm,
probably build a campaign of 6 to 8 press releases where at least 2 to 4 of them do get earned media. And that's a success rate much higher than 3%. And so
yeah.
I have a free masterclass where I go into the 3% of press releases that do get picked up, and the story based press release incorporating a story arc in there, like a use case study in a product launch or something like that. Doing the industry blind spots and talking about those. And it's a great way for anybody who's new to PR to go through that, think in a different way about the types of releases that you could do. Because if you look at your competitors and follow the releases they're doing, they're probably failing. And if you go
Mm,
to AI and ask AI to come up with press releases for you, it's been trained on the 97% of press releases that
right.
fail. And
Yes.
so it's not going to come up with a good idea. You always need to approach AI with exactly what you want the
Yeah, you
press
need a
release to be about.
strategy.
Right.
Not
Y-
let the AI pick the strategy. You have to
Right.
have the strategy and have AI help you, but assist you in that. But without the strategy, which is what you're bringing up, is where. So
Yeah.
then, Industry surveys seem to be one of the secret weapons for guarantee media pickup. Do you agree with that?
The what
The
the
industry surveys could be one of the secret weapons for the media to guarantee the pickup because you're kind of going into doing research within the industry.
Yes, yes.
So
Being knowledgeable about your industry, being able to talk about trends, talk about forecast. I always tell people, later in the year or at the beginning of the year is a great time to give your predictions, your forecast for the either the coming year or the incoming year. And people like things like that. And I always tell people a good thing is you want a balance of like 80% of what you say to be like, yeah, I recognize that makes sense. And maybe the 20% is a place where you're very creative and you provide some things that are a little out there, a little outlandish, you're pushing the curve a little bit in a way, but you have some evidence for it. You could say, say things about your industry that 80% of the people would agree with, and 20% that gets them really thinking. Like, wow, do you think that could really be? And you don't always have to be right, but you have to be provocative and get people talking and thinking. And as long as you balance it with some things that are probably going to be true and people are seeing, but also some stuff that's forward thinking and creative and vibrant and gets people excited and things along those lines. And other types of strategic releases are doing an industry survey. That is the easiest way for anybody, no matter how non-newsworthy you think you are. If you do an industry survey, you will be catapulted into to leadership because you're recognized as a thought leader by being the author of a survey. And you don't need a big Rolodex of people in your industry to send it to because there are many dozens, if not hundreds, of small and independent trade associations in every industry. Stay away from the big ones that everybody knows, the ones that sponsor the conferences and conventions. But do a little research, some Google searches, and find one where the audience matches maybe your customer base or matches, the market you're in, so your competitors, and put together a survey. I like Survey Monkey, 4 questions per page. So, 12 questions or 8 or 16. And at the end of it, you have the opportunity to send them somewhere. So, if they're competitors, send them to a page on your website and define who your ideal customer is and introduce yourself. Ask for their email address so that you can send them a copy of the survey when it's done. These potentially could be partners. If you're in a market that they don't want to be in, they now have someone that they can send those to, and you've made a warm introduction. People don't realize how effective it is to partner with other people in your industry because everybody has a sweet spot. Like, hey, we like to go after government clients, and you're like, well, if you ever have private clients come to you, feel free to recommend them to us because that's what we're looking for, and that works well. If it's potentially the survey is done by like your clients, people who would be your clients, that's another way where the people that come through the survey can go to that page and be introduced to you and ask them to put their email in and get them on your list and they can become a lead as well. And it's as simple as taking the link from SurveyMonkey and approaching that trade association and say, hey, I'm doing a survey. Could you send this to your members? I'm looking for at least 100 to be statistically relevant. And in exchange for that, I will put you in a press release I'll be issuing over PR Newswire in the coming weeks. They don't have a lot of recognition. They're not the large trade associations. So they'll see it as a win-win. And about 2/3 of the time, the first trade association you approach will say yes, and they'll push it to their members through email. And if you don't get 100 responses or more, you could go back to them and they'll push it again, usually either through email or maybe a social media push to get the numbers up a little bit. And you don't have to be exactly at 100, but you want to be closer to
yeah,
that
yeah.
number. And so I find that works really effectively. It's not a lot of work. The big thing is make sure you're asking questions that people would want to know the answer to right now? What are things that people are talking about in your industry or fears that people have? Is it AI? Is AI going to replace our jobs? Ask some questions around that. Is it work culture? People are having difficulty in your industry getting people to want to come back into the office, or how do you define work culture when a lot of people are working remotely? There could be questions around that, or it could be stuff that's very specific to your industry, and it can be a variety of those. Like I said, you could ask 8 questions, 12, as many as 16. And the great thing is, if someone stops along the way, you still have their initial responses. And that's why I like four
Mm.
per page. So you put the most important questions in the beginning. And sometimes if people give up, you still have those early responses that they gave you. And, generally I take those survey results. I analyze them. What was the big aha moment? What would surprise somebody in the survey, and build the press release around that one aha moment. Maybe you could incorporate a second moment as well, but don't use all the questions in the press release. You're going to focus on one or two. You're going to provide an amazing quote of why you felt the analysis skewed that way, and you don't always have to agree with it. If 2/3 of the people said they believe AI is going to replace them in the next 5 years, you could be the reasonable person who comes in and says, "While I think that's unlikely to happen, I do think that people in our industry who don't know how to use AI as a tool are going to be at a very serious disadvantage over the next few years." And, it's a way to make you sound really thoughtful, providing some analysis on the survey. But do link to a page on your website where you have all the questions and answers, because what you'll find is journalists will go there, they'll review them, and
Ah,
maybe there's another article that they could write about question 8 that you didn't focus the press release on. And I've had people do this, and they get a couple of articles on other questions, and then they do a press release on that approach, and then they get additional media pickup. The average press release that is involved with a industry survey generally yields 4 to 8 articles, 4 to 8 earned media articles. These are unique articles, they're industry specific. It's a great way to get visibility in your market, and it works almost every single time. I personally have never had any of my clients who've used an industry survey not get earned media. And
oh my gosh, I
uh,
love this process.
yeah,
You people, listeners, audience, please. I mean, this is a great I mean, I'm a researcher at heart, so I love this process because it's so clear, clean, and to the point where I can see where this really leads to a great outcome and a success for, your clients to really get the visibility that they're
and
looking
and
for.
sometimes it doesn't even have to be around data. We had a local auto parts repair shop in Pennsylvania that had a new domain name, and they were trying to get links from auto trades publications. And they did a survey. And on the last page, I told them they could ask some, sillier questions, because it's the last page. The important questions have been answered. And we had a field that said, "What's the strangest thing someone left in their car while being repaired?" They sent it to their trade association of independent car mechanics and auto repair shops. And we just cherry picked like 60 to 80 entertaining um, answers that people gave. None of them statistically relevant, because nobody put the same thing. We put that on the website with all of the responses, but we put all, I think, 60 to 80 there. And we highlighted, like, I think 10 to 20 in the press release. And surprisingly, that did extremely well. A lot of the automotive trade publications not only included maybe 10 of those ideas. A lot of them linked to the page that had all of the roundup of things. And so they got a lot of inbound links, which helped their new domain name rank very well. And again, they were just like, when they came to me, they said, "An SEO friend of ours recommended you, but we don't know how this would work because we're not newsworthy." And yet, by them authoring that survey and getting those links to their website, they became relevant, and they were the author of that fun, entertaining
That is so
story.
cool. I
Yeah.
love it. That's a great process. Well, this is great. So, So in your training that you offer on your website, that you explain a little bit more on all these
Sure.
details, right? So
Right.
so
So
tell us, yeah.
my website is eReleases.com. The free training that I mentioned that goes through the strategic types of press releases you could be doing, including the industry survey, the industry blind spots, that's available at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. Again, it's completely free. It's less than an hour long video because my employees came back and said, no one's going to watch this 6 hour class that you have. So I made it shorter. It's less than an hour. It also has downloads for those who just prefer to look at the meat of it, and it really gives you a really strong types of press releases you should focus on. And if you follow that and you do a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases, whether that takes you a year to a year and a half to do all 6 to 8 releases, and you follow that model, you will have 2 to 4 of those generate earned media for you. And you know, in the case of some of my customers, it can be a huge difference to your bottom line, your influx of leads. And then you also take that earned media, put it in front of your own leads. If you convert at 20%, you put those articles in front of your leads and you might start converting at 30%. You take those same articles and you put them on your social media, you share them with your customers, you put them in your newsletters, you'll see your churn rate go down. If you lose like 20% of your customers annually, people who normally shop around and feel that it's in best practice to shop around every couple of years are going to be less likely to do that because they're going to see you in this article and say, oh, we're with the right company. We don't need to shop around this year.
That's amazing. And if people, the audience, you don't want to do all the work, you can hire Mickie and he can do it for you. So that will be the easiest path so that he can hold your hand and take you through the end of the whole journey to be successful.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Mickie, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the insights, all the information that you provided to the audience. It has been amazing. I love research, so I love all the stuff that you explained today. So for the audience, I will put all the details about Mickie and the website and the free resources on the show notes. And if you're on my YouTube show, then you're going to see that as well in order to access all his information. Thank you, Mickie, so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Very welcome.
All right, take care.